It all began in a place meant to contain evil, but instead, it helped it grow. California Men's Colony, a gray, echoing prison in San Luis Obispo, the kind of place where time moves slow and the walls hum with secrets. It was 1978 when two inmates, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, crossed paths inside those walls. At first glance, they were nothing special, two ordinary men serving ordinary sentences. But what no one knew was that when these two met, something dark connected, something that would one day terrorize Southern California. Bittaker was the quiet one. He was intelligent, calculating, the kind of man who spoke softly but always seemed to be watching. He had a sharp mind, even described by prison staff as smart enough to go far, if only he used it right. Then there was Norris, a drifter, more impulsive, more emotional. He had been in and out of prison for assaults and sexual crimes. He wasn't clever like Bittaker, but he was dangerous in his own way, unpredictable, violent, and hungry for control. In the yard, their worlds collided. They started as casual acquaintances, exchanging cigarettes, talking about cars, women, and life outside the fences. But those conversations slowly began to twist into something darker. Inside the prison library, during long hours of boredom, they would talk about what they'd do once they were free. What started as crude jokes soon turned into detailed fantasies. Bittaker would lean in, voice low, coldly describing ways to trap and dominate women. And Norris would laugh, not realizing his new friend wasn't joking. Over time, those fantasies became plans, real plans. Bittaker, the manipulator, started writing them down. Steps, methods, tools. Norris listened, learning, absorbing. He was easily influenced, and Bittaker knew it. He told Norris, when we get out, we could do something special, something nobody's done before. To Norris, it sounded like a challenge. To Bittaker, it was a promise. Both men were nearing parole. In the months before their release, they spoke of practice runs, of the perfect victims. They even discussed what kind of vehicle they would need, one that could move unnoticed, carry tools, and keep sound from escaping. They decided on a van. When they walked out of prison, two men, free again, it should have been the end of a chapter, but it was only the beginning. Bittaker moved to Los Angeles and started working as a machinist. He was quiet, punctual, and strangely polite. His co-workers had no idea what he was truly building in his mind. Norris got a small place nearby. On the outside, he blended in. Nobody suspected that these two ex-cons were still in touch. But at night, they met again, in diners, parking lots, or quiet bars. And each time they talked, the fantasies came back stronger. They began rehearsing, driving up and down the Pacific Coast Highway, picking up hitchhikers, talking to them, and then letting them go. It was like they were testing the waters, seeing how close they could get before they crossed the line. Then came the day they found the perfect vehicle. A silver gray 1977 GMC cargo van. Plain, unmarked, no windows in the back. They bought it for cash and customized it. Inside, they added curtains for privacy, hooks for restraint, and storage for their tools. They called it Murder Mack. To anyone else, it was just a van. But to them, it was a mobile hunting ground. Bittaker smiled as he looked at it, calm, cold, in control. Norris laughed nervously, still not fully realizing the path he was on. And as the sun dipped behind the California mountains, the two men sat inside that van, planning their first outing. Bittaker looked over at Norris and said, "We've talked enough. It's time to start." And that night, for the first time, Murder Mack rolled onto the open road. The highways that once carried tourists and dreamers were now home to something far more sinister. But their first trip wouldn't end in murder, not yet, because these two weren't just killers. They were planners. They wanted to learn, to perfect their method. And by the time they were done, California would remember their names as the Toolbox Killers. Part 2. Murder Mack Hits the Road. Summer 1979. The California sun was bright. The coastlines alive with hitchhikers, young dreamers trying to catch rides, chase music, and taste freedom. And rolling down those same highways was a van, a silver gray GMC that looked like any other work vehicle. But inside, behind those black curtains and metal hooks, something evil waited. They called it Murder Mack. And Lawrence Bittaker was behind the wheel. He looked calm, maybe too calm, as the wind swept through his thinning hair. Next to him, Roy Norris laughed nervously, trying to act normal, but his hands trembled. They weren't just driving, they were hunting. For weeks, they'd practice their act. They'd pick up hitchhikers, mostly girls, just to talk, just to see how easy it was. Some they offered drinks to, others they dropped off safely. It made them seem harmless, friendly even. But with each practice run, the fantasy in their minds grew louder. Then came June 24th, 1979. That was the day the line disappeared. A 16-year-old girl named Lucinda Lynn Schaefer was walking home from church in Redondo Beach. She wasn't the kind to take risks. She didn't drink, didn't smoke. That night, she just wanted to get home. But when a van slowed beside her, two men smiled politely, asking if she needed a lift. She shook her head. She said no. She kept walking. But Bittaker didn't take no easily. He drove ahead, parked, waited. As she passed, Norris grabbed her and pulled her inside. The van doors slammed. The sound of her scream was swallowed by the waves and the road. Inside Murder Mack, the world went quiet, except for her cries and their laughter. They drove her deep into the San Gabriel Mountains, a place they had already chosen, a place with no lights, no witnesses, and no way out. Hours passed. The van rocked in the still night. Bittaker told Norris to keep her quiet while he tested their new tools. By dawn, Lucinda was gone. Her body was never found. But for Bittaker and Norris, it wasn't about the killing, not yet. It was about the control, the feeling of power, the rush of being in charge of life and death. After that night, they went back to their normal lives. Bittaker returned to work smiling, polite. Norris went back to his apartment, acting like nothing happened. They even met for lunch a few days later, laughing, planning, talking about what they could improve next time. To them, this was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, July 8th, they struck again. This time, their victim was Andrea Joy Hall, 18 years old. She was hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway, her thumb out, her smile bright, just like dozens of others that day. Bittaker and Norris offered her a ride, pretending to be friendly travelers. But when she climbed inside, everything changed. Andrea noticed something off: the dark curtains, the way the doors locked from the inside. Before she could react, Norris grabbed her, forcing her down. They drove for hours, deep into the mountains again, where they stopped at the same remote pullout. This time, Bittaker wanted to take souvenirs. He pulled out a Polaroid camera. Each click of the shutter froze Andrea's terror forever. Pictures of pain, fear, and broken innocence. When they were done, they argued about what to do next. Norris wanted to end it quickly. Bittaker wanted to make it last. Eventually, Norris turned away as Bittaker took her life. They left her body somewhere in those mountains, her resting place still unknown to this day. By now, their pattern was set: pick up, control, torture, kill. Each one made them more confident, more daring, more efficient. The silver van became their mobile dungeon, filled with tools, duct tape, rope, pliers, screwdrivers, and ice picks. And every time the doors closed, another life ended. Over the next few months, they would find 3 more victims, each one younger, more vulnerable. But the final one would make even the most hardened detectives sick to their stomachs. Because the next girl wasn't just taken, she was recorded. And that tape would haunt everyone who ever heard it. Part 3. The Tools of Terror. By late summer 1979, Murder Mack had become more than just a van. It was a moving chamber of horror. Inside its metal walls, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris had built something they called their toolbox. But this wasn't for fixing engines or carpentry. This toolbox was for breaking people. A sledgehammer, pliers, ice picks, vice grips, and duct tape. Each item had a purpose. Each one had a memory. It was Bittaker's idea to turn something so ordinary into something monstrous. He told Norris, "Nobody ever suspects a toolbox." And he was right. When people saw that silver gray van on the road, they saw 2 handymen. Nobody knew what screamed behind those steel doors. Their next victims were Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Jacqueline Lamp, 13, 2 young girls just trying to get a ride to the beach. It was September 3rd, 1979. The girls waved as Murder Mack pulled over. Bittaker smiled kindly from the driver's seat. He looked like a father figure, calm, composed. "Need a lift?" he asked. They climbed in. Minutes later, as the van took a wrong turn, the girls grew uneasy. The coast disappeared behind them, replaced by desert road. When one of them tried to open the door, Norris swung from behind and hit her. The van fell silent except for their whimpers. Hours later, in the same lonely mountain area, Bittaker parked the van. The toolbox came out. And for the next 2 days, those mountains became a stage for unimaginable cruelty. Each scream, each cry was met with calm laughter from the men who called it practice. Bittaker recorded some of it on a small cassette player, not because he wanted to remember, but because he enjoyed reliving it. He told Norris it made him feel powerful. When the girls begged for mercy, Norris said, "Don't look at me. It's his turn now." It was a partnership built on shared darkness, each man trying to outdo the other in brutality. By the end of the second day, both girls were gone. Their bodies were dumped off a steep canyon, lost forever beneath the brush. And when it was over, Bittaker didn't seem shaken. He looked satisfied, analytical, like a man checking off a task from his list. He cleaned the van, washed the tools, and put everything neatly back in the toolbox. To him, this was order. This was art. They went back to their normal lives again, drinking beer, watching TV, talking about their next hunt. That's when Bittaker brought up a new idea. He wanted to find a younger girl next time, one that would sound scarce enough for a recording. Norris didn't argue. He nodded, smiled faintly, and said, Bittaker grinned, "Yeah, for the tape." He wanted something permanent, something they could listen to whenever they wanted to feel that power again. And then, one October night, they found her. Shirley Lynette Ledford, 16 years old, sweet, innocent, standing outside a gas station after a Halloween party, waiting for a ride home. It was October 31st, 1979, Halloween night. Bittaker and Norris slowed down beside her, the same silver van creeping under the streetlights. They offered her a lift. She recognized them. She had seen Bittaker before, outside the restaurant where she worked. So she climbed in. Inside, Norris locked the doors. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet night. Bittaker turned on the tape recorder. He said calmly, "Let's keep this one for memory." What happened next would become one of the most disturbing crimes in American history, so horrifying that even hardened detectives who heard that tape later on broke down in tears. It wasn't just a murder. It was a recording of evil itself. And as the tape played on that cold Halloween night, Shirley's screams echoed through the van. Each second captured, each sound of pain preserved forever. But they didn't know that one careless act would soon unravel their sick empire, and the tape that made them proud would soon become the very thing that destroyed them. Part 4. The Trail of the Van. By the fall of 1979, Los Angeles had grown uneasy. Posters of missing girls were showing up on every telephone pole. 5 disappearances in 5 months. All teenage hitchhikers, all vanishing without a trace. Somewhere out there, a gray GMC van was moving through the streets like a ghost. Police departments across Southern California were chasing dead ends until one tip came in that changed everything. A man named Joseph Jackson, an ex-con and parolee, walked into the Hermosa Beach Police Department. He said his friend, Roy Norris, had been talking, bragging even, about rapes, torture, and murder. At first, the officers thought it was another jailhouse rumor, but Jackson's tone wasn't gossip. It was fear. He said the crime sounded too specific, the details too real. And he said something else, that Norris wasn't alone. Detectives began quietly pulling Norris's file. He had a record: sexual assaults, violent behavior, time served at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. And that was where he'd met another inmate, Lawrence Bittaker. Bittaker was different. Cold, calculating, a mechanical genius with an IQ far above average. While Norris was impulsive, Bittaker was deliberate. Together, they'd formed the kind of partnership only prison walls could breed, a shared obsession with control and pain. Once Norris was released, Bittaker followed a few months later. They reunited on the outside and bought a silver-gray 1977 GMC van, stripped of its side windows for privacy. They called it Murder Mack. Now, months later, that same van had become the thread tying their nightmare together. Detective Paul Bynum, a methodical veteran investigator, was assigned to dig into the van connection. He started reviewing missing persons reports, noting something chilling. Each disappearance occurred near a coastal road or parking lot where a similar van had been seen. Witnesses remembered little things: a tall, quiet man with sharp eyes in the driver's seat, a shorter one in the passengers, the sound of sliding doors, the smell of cigarettes. To anyone else, these were scattered coincidences, but to Bynum, they were breadcrumbs leading somewhere very dark. Police began surveillance on Norris. They followed him from his apartment to his job. Nothing suspicious at first, until one officer noticed the silver van parked outside his place. That same model had been mentioned in 3 separate missing persons reports. The detective took note of the license plate. He didn't know it yet, but he was looking at Murder Mack. In late November, a decision was made. They'd bring Norris in for questioning. It wasn't an arrest yet, just a chat. Detectives wanted to see how he'd react under pressure. At first, Norris was calm. He smiled, even joked. But when they started mentioning the missing girls and the van, his confidence cracked. He began to sweat. His eyes darted. And when asked about his friend Bittaker, his tone changed completely. He said they were just friends, that they liked taking drives. But his answers came too fast, too rehearsed. When police released him that night, they knew something for sure. They were close. Meanwhile, teams were already tracking Bittaker. They found him working quietly at a machine shop in Burbank. Neighbors described him as polite, intelligent, the kind of man who keeps to himself. But detectives who'd seen his record knew better. Behind that calm face was a violent narcissist with a genius for manipulation. When they compared both men's parole timelines, travel routes, and overlapping locations of missing girls, it all aligned perfectly. Every clue, every disappearance pointed to one thing: the van. Back at the station, Detective Bynum spread the photos across his desk. 5 smiling teenage faces and a photo of the GMC van. He whispered to himself, "Find the van, find the truth." He didn't know how right he was, because that van would soon open the door to a world no one was prepared to see. And what it contained, photographs, tools, and something else, would shake even the toughest officers to their core. But for now, the police had only a trail of suspicion and a feeling that time was running out. Part 5. The Confession That Broke the Case. When detectives finally called Roy Norris back into the station, they weren't just fishing for clues anymore. They were tightening a noose. Days of quiet surveillance had paid off. They'd found Murder Mack, the silver gray van, sitting in a parking lot near Norris's apartment. Inside, officers spotted ropes, plastic sheeting, and what looked like a homemade toolkit. They didn't touch it yet. They wanted a confession first. Norris walked in wearing a nervous smile, trying to play casual. But Detective Paul Bynum could see it. The trembling hands, the darting eyes, the weight of something terrible pressing down. The first few minutes were routine. "Roy," Bynum said gently, "we just want to clear some things up." Norris nodded, scratching his arm, fidgeting. Then the detective dropped the first photo on the table. Lucinda Schaefer, the 16-year-old who vanished in June. Norris looked at it, then looked away. Another photo followed. Andrea Hall. Then another. Jackie Gilliam. Each picture came down like a hammer blow. Finally, Bynum leaned forward. "Roy, your friend Lawrence, we've spoken to him." It was a bluff. They hadn't yet. "He's already talking." The room went silent. Norris's eyes widened, and that was the moment the dam began to crack. He started slow, saying Bittaker was into weird stuff, that sometimes they picked up girls and things got out of hand. But when Bynum quietly said, "Roy, we already know what you did," Norris broke. His words tumbled out like a flood. 5 girls, 1 van, a summer of nightmares. He said they would drive up and down the Pacific Coast Highway, pretending to be friendly, offering rides. Bittaker always drove. Norris handled the duct tape. Once the girl was inside, there was no way out. They'd drive into the San Gabriel Mountains, to a dirt fire road far from sight. That's where the screaming began. He told them about Lucinda Schaefer, the first victim. How they tried to lure her, failed, then forced her in. How Bittaker strangled her with a wire coat hanger and pliers. He told them about Andrea Hall, abducted near Redondo Beach. They took Polaroids of her before killing her. He said Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp were both held for nearly 2 days, tortured while a tape recorder ran. And finally, with his voice cracking, he spoke about Shirley Lynette Ledford, the last one, just 16, picked up on Halloween night. "She was screaming," he whispered, staring at the floor. "Larry made me record it." The detectives froze. They weren't prepared for what came next. Norris described a tape, an audio recording of Shirley's final moments. He said Bittaker kept it as a trophy. When police searched Bittaker's motel room, they found it. And the moment the tape began to play, even the most hardened investigators couldn't stand it. Officers cried, others walked out. The screams of that girl filled the room. Raw, endless, unforgettable. It was the single most disturbing piece of evidence ever played in a courtroom. From Norris's confession, detectives built a mountain of proof. They recovered Polaroids, jewelry belonging to victims, and hundreds of photos of young women, some still missing. They traced the van to crime scenes in the mountains, finding spent shell casings that matched Norris's pistol. And just like that, the nightmare had a face. When they went for Lawrence Bittaker, he didn't resist. He smiled as they cuffed him, cold and quiet. At the station, he denied everything, claiming Norris made it all up. But the evidence spoke louder than he ever could. The photos, the tools, the tape, and the confession that sealed their fate. Detective Bynum stood outside the interrogation room that night, staring through the one-way glass at the two men who'd haunted Los Angeles all summer. Two ordinary-looking men, one thin and still, the other jittery and hollow-eyed. He whispered, 5 girls, all gone because of these two. Then he walked out, exhausted. For him, and for every officer who heard that tape, the case would never leave them. Roy Norris agreed to testify in exchange for life in prison. Bittaker, the self-proclaimed mastermind, would face trial alone. As the detectives packed away the case files that night, one of them said quietly, "It started with a van, and it ends with a confession." Part 6. The Faces of Evil. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that comes only when everyone in the room knows they're about to hear evil speak. In the defendant's chair sat Lawrence Bittaker, calm, expressionless, wearing a neatly pressed shirt as though he were attending a business meeting instead of facing 5 counts of murder. Across the room sat Roy Norris, already sentenced, brought in under heavy guard to testify against his former friend. It was November 1981. 2 years had passed since the murders. The state of California was ready to confront the monsters who had hunted its daughters. When the prosecutor pressed play on the cassette tape, the air changed. First came Shirley Ledford's voice, then the sound of Bittaker laughing. Jurors covered their ears. Reporters left the room in tears. Even seasoned officers wept quietly. One juror later said, "I didn't know humans could be that cruel." It took only minutes for the jury to understand. These weren't just murders. They were acts of deliberate, calculated horror. Roy Norris took the stand next. He didn't look like the muscle of the operation anymore. His voice shook as he described each night in the van. The pliers, the ice pick, the terror. When asked why he helped, he said softly, "I was scared of him, scared of Bittaker." But the prosecutor didn't let him hide behind fear. He pushed, "Scared enough to torture 5 girls?" Norris broke down, covering his face. The courtroom watched a man crumble under the weight of his own crimes. Still, his testimony painted the full picture. The way Bittaker planned everything, recorded every scream, and kept souvenirs as trophies. It was chilling, and it sealed the verdict. On March 24, 1981, after weeks of testimony and hundreds of pieces of evidence, the jury found Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of kidnapping, 9 counts of sexual assault, and numerous other charges. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Bittaker smiled faintly and said, "I feel no remorse." The judge's voice trembled with anger as he spoke the words, "You are sentenced to death." Outside the courthouse, families of the victims embraced each other and cried. For them, justice had come, but peace never would. Bittaker was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he became known as the Toolbox Killer. He spent nearly 4 decades on death row, never showing remorse, often writing letters to journalists describing his crimes in detail, as if proud of them. In December 2019, at age 79, he died of natural causes, still awaiting execution. Roy Norris, meanwhile, served life in prison. He later said that nightmares of the girls' screams haunted him every night. In February 2020, he too died behind bars. 2 men, 5 victims, no redemption. In the years since, the name Toolbox Killers has become a symbol, not just of cruelty, but of how evil can hide in plain sight. Two ordinary men with a van driving through California's sunny streets, passing neighbors who never suspected a thing. It's the reminder that monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes they smile, wave, and drive past us in broad daylight. If you followed this story from part 1 till now, make sure to hit subscribe. More true crime stories like this are coming, because behind every headline, there's a story the world never truly heard.